Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the Deep Dives, where we take complex foundational source material and really try to extract the core insights you need to know.
Mm.
Today, we are tackling a huge project, summarizing the introduction to the MIT Encyclopedia of the Cognitive Sciences, or MITEX as it's known.
Yeah.
Our mission is to figure out why this thing was even created, what fields it covers, and, I think most importantly, what are the big ideas that hold it all together.
It's such a crucial deep dive because, the editors themselves basically said it was born out of pure necessity.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Cognitive science had been booming for, 25 years before this was compiled, and it had become a victim of its own success, in a way.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you had all these excellent books on psychology or linguistics or philosophy of mind, but there wasn't one single place you could go to see the full picture.
I see.
There was no resource that really represented the whole range of concepts and methods and results from across the entire field.
So it wasn't just about, collecting facts. It was about creating a kind of coherent map for a field that had just gotten too big for any one person to handle.
Exactly. They wanted to show the diversity, the history, and where it was all going. It was about creating a unified map.
Okay, and that map is structured around these 6 foundational pillars, right?
That's it. If you want to understand cognitive science, you have to start with these 6. Philosophy, psychology, neurosciences, computational intelligence, linguistics and language, and then the last one, culture, cognition, and evolution.
That is an incredibly broad list. I mean, it's easy to just see those as 6 totally separate towers of knowledge.
Right.
So we need to get into what each one is actually doing and how they all work together to understand, well, the mind.
And what's so fascinating is how different their approaches are. They're all studying the same thing, cognition, but at completely different levels of analysis.
So let's start with philosophy. It's the oldest one on the list, but I'm guessing it's still pretty fundamental to the whole project.
Oh, absolutely foundational. Philosophy here is mostly the philosophy of mind, so it's tackling those huge, timeless questions like the mind-body problem or the relationship between the mental and the physical.
Okay.
And crucially, it holds on to the historical context for the whole field, especially that long-running debate between rationalism and empiricism.
Right. For anyone who might need a quick refresher on those terms, what's the core idea there?
Sure. It's really the debate over where knowledge comes from. Rationalism is the idea that we're born with a lot of innate structure, built-in knowledge.
Okay, nature.
Sort of. And empiricism is the argument that the mind is more of a blank slate, and we learn everything through experience and our senses.
Nurture.
Exactly. And that tension, which is literally centuries old, is still a really active debate in cognitive science.
And that leads us perfectly into psychology then. The Encyclopedia defines it as the science of how complex organisms represent and process information.
That's the one. Psychology focuses on what they call the middle level of analysis.
What does that mean, the middle level?
Well, think of it like this. If neurosciences are studying the physical hardware of a computer, the chips, the wiring psychology is focused on the software.
The algorithms and the data structures.
Exactly that. They're looking at how information is represented and processed, and they do it by sort of abstracting away from the nitty-gritty details of the neurons.
Which is interesting because that gap abstracting away from the brain is precisely what the next pillar, neurosciences, is trying to fill.
Correct. And when we say neuroscience here, we mean a very specific kind, functional neuroscience. The goal is to figure out how the brain's structures and signals actually explain things like perception, memory, and even consciousness.
So they're looking for the physical mechanisms behind the algorithms that psychology is describing.
That's a perfect way to put it, yes.
So neuroscience is the hardware and psychology is the software, and computational intelligence, or AI, gives us the tools to understand the logic of that software, right?
Right. And AI is sort of a two-sided coin here. On one side, it's engineering, building smart machines that can do things.
Like recognize faces or translate languages.
Yep. But on the other side, it's a pure empirical science. It's about building computational models of how humans think. What unites them is they both try to understand intelligence in these very rigorous computational terms.
Okay, so then we move to how we communicate all that intelligence,
Right.
which brings us to linguistics and language.
Mm-hmm.
And this field sees language not just as like a cultural thing, but is a core cognitive ability. They call it linguistic competence.
That phrase, linguistic competence, is so important. It's about the implicit, unconscious knowledge of grammar that lets us produce and understand a basically infinite number of new sentences.
Things we've never even heard before.
Exactly. And the reason they think it's an innate capacity is because of all the striking regularities you find across every language in the world. It suggests there's some kind of built-in combinatorial device in the mind.
Which leaves us with the last pillar, the one that sort of wraps around everything else: culture, cognition, and evolution.
This is the real macro-level view. It's asking how our cognitive abilities make culture and society possible, and then how does culture turn around and shape how we think as individuals?
It sounds like it draws a lot from evolutionary psychology.
It does, yeah. It leans heavily on this idea of evolved domain-specific abilities. The thinking is that the mind isn't one big general-purpose computer, but more like a Swiss Army knife.
A set of specialized tools.
A set of specialized mental tools, each one evolved to solve a specific recurring problem our ancestors faced.
So, okay, we've got these 6 massive super specialized fields. The next logical question is a practical one. How does an encyclopedia make all of this accessible to someone new?
The editors had a really clear vision for that. They wanted this book to be a frequent, perhaps even daily tool in research.
Not just something that sits on a shelf.
Not at all. And to do that, they were very strict about the structure. The articles are incredibly short, mostly between 1,000 and 1,500 words.
That conciseness is what makes it so powerful, isn't it? It means you're not getting bogged down in some 50-page chapter when you just need a quick overview of a related field.
You've got it. But the real genius, I think, is in how it forces you to read non-linearly. It's just not designed to be read from A to Z. It's designed for making connections.
So how does a reader actually do that? How do they navigate this web of ideas?
There are 2 main tools. First, anytime a core concept is mentioned inside an article, it's written in small capitals.
Like a hyperlink in a web page.
It's exactly like that. It's an invitation to jump straight to that entry, even if it's in a totally different discipline. And second, every single article ends with a short "see also" list of class references.
So the book itself is built to break down the silos between the 6 pillars.
Absolutely. The whole design encourages this thing they call cross-fertilization. And there's another interesting choice that supports that, the section introductions.
Right, the essays written by the advisory editors for each of the 6 fields.
Yeah, and they were explicitly told not to be perfectly neutral. They were given the license to express their own perspectives on their discipline.
That's so counterintuitive for a reference book. Why would they do that?
Because it gives you an orientation. For a student just starting out, these essays give you a feel for the live debates and the theoretical landscape before you dive into the specific articles. They set the context.
That structure points us to maybe the most important part of this whole introduction.
Yeah.
The unifying threads. What are the core ideas that hold all these different fields together?
Well, the editors point out a few key concepts that just keep popping up everywhere. And the most fundamental one, the one that's really central to the whole enterprise, is representation.
And what does that mean exactly? It sounds like it could mean a lot of different things.
It's the idea that thinking happens via some kind of internal symbol or structure that stands for something in the world. Psychology, for instance, literally defines itself by the representation and processing of information. And in philosophy, there's this major view called representationalism, which says that mental states, like a belief or a desire, are just relationships between a person and their internal mental representations.
So it's the medium of thought.
It's the medium of thought. Even in linguistics, a concept like logical form is basically an abstract structure designed to explicitly represent the meaning of a sentence.
And as soon as you have representation, the next concept, computation,
Yeah.
has to follow, right?
It's right there with it. Because the computational theory of mind, or CTM, is probably the single most important idea in all of cognitive science.
And why is that?
Because it's the answer to a classic philosophical trap called the problem of the homunculus.
The homunculus problem. Okay, you have to explain that one.
So it's an infinite regress problem.
Yeah.
If you say that thinking happens inside the mind, you then have to explain what's doing the thinking inside the mind.
Right.
If you say, well, there's a little person, a homunculus, inside your head watching the screen of your eyes and making decisions, then you have to ask, well, what's inside that little person's head?
Oh, I see. It just goes on forever. You
Right.
never actually explain anything.
You never explain the mechanism. CTM solves this by saying that mental states aren't an agent, they're computational relations between representations. It's an algorithm. And once you have an algorithm, you don't need the little person anymore. The computation is the explanation.
Wow, okay. That immediately reframes that whole debate and brings us to the third big thread, the mind-brain relationship.
This is that classic mental physical problem from philosophy, but now it's being tackled as an empirical question, mainly by the neurosciences.
Right. They're looking for the neural substrates of things like memory and attention.
Exactly. And the introduction points out that there are really two paths to a biological view of cognition.
What are they?
There's the neurobiological path, which is looking at the immediate mechanisms, the hardware. And then there's the evolutionary path, which is looking at how these systems were shaped over deep time as adaptations. It's the how and the why.
And the final thread takes us all the way back to where we started, to that ancient philosophical debate, learning and nativism.
That's right. It's just rationalism versus empiricism in modern terms. And that debate is still so active, in arguments about whether language is innate or whether the mind is modular.
But now we can study it with modern tools.
Precisely. The idea of learning itself has become this central thing that we can measure and model, especially in AI, with the entire field of machine learning.
It's amazing. A conceptual fight from the 17th century is now the engine for 21st century tech. So this encyclopedia isn't just a book, it's a map of this whole intellectual landscape.
And that structure is what makes it so valuable for you, the listener, as a resource. By following those small capitals and the see also links, the book is literally designed to make you do that cross-fertilization.
So if you're, say, a neuroscience student, reading the philosophy entry on functionalism might completely change how you think about the brain.
That's the whole idea.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? I think the introduction to my text shows us something really profound, that the most valuable insights aren't always found deep within one specialty. Sometimes they're found in the connections, in the questions that are raised by the links between different fields.
I think that's exactly right. The real breakthroughs happen when you master your own domain, but then see how a concept from a totally different field can solve a problem you've been stuck on. That act of connecting the dots, that's the essential skill.
Especially in a world where we're all drowning in information. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the foundations of cognitive science. We hope you feel significantly more well-informed.